I have for years been asking trappers to let me put trail cams on their snare lines, and of course none of them will let you.
This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. John E. Marriott has taken some of the most breathtaking photos of wildlife that I have ever seen. He's the keynote speaker at the Fur Bearers gala event, including the Clements Awards on March 30th, and he's been a regular on Defender Radio, sharing stories about his adventures, ethical wildlife photography, and conservation. In the latest episode of his popular web series, Exposed with John E. Marriott, John tackles snares, the cruel devices responsible for killing wolves, coyotes, and countless other non-target species across Canada. Links to the video episode, which does contain graphic content, can be found in this week's show notes or at thefurbears.com. To discuss this latest episode, what he's learned about government regulation on snares, and why every animal lover should be concerned, John joined Defender Radio. So let's start. Let's start at the beginning of this whole story. You're a well-known wildlife photographer. You are a very compassionate man. You are very much a conservationist in the true sense of the word. How did this story, for this exposed episode that's now sort of going viral across the internet, how did it start?
It started in a number of ways. Number one, I guess, long ago, almost 20 years ago now, I stumbled across my first trap line that had snares on it, and remembered at the time, not really knowing anything about it, not knowing what it was targeting, not knowing how animals died in the traps, really not knowing a thing about it, and slowly starting to educate myself over the last couple of decades. And then this particular episode that, has really shocked people, I think, and has started to educate the masses onto what's really going on behind the scenes in the fur industry in Canada with trapping using killing neck snares. I got a phone call, actually got a quick message from a group called Wolf Matters, who said, and this was just at the end of January this year, 2019, who said that they had just received a note from a fellow that had run into a live trap line in Kananaskis country in Alberta and had encountered a wolf alive, caught by the leg in one of these snares. And so I immediately messaged them back and said, can you please pass along his information to me? And they did. Took until the next day for him to get back to me, and I spoke with him on the phone, and he told me the story, and I got off the phone with him, and I phoned my little Exposed web series team and said, guys, we've got to change our focus entirely. We've got an episode that we've got to do right now. And they all agreed with me, and they came down. I actually went and visited this trap line, went and found it for myself a couple of days later, as soon as I could get out there. My crew came down 3 days later, and we went out and filmed this fellow and his friend that had encountered this live wolf. And we just very quickly started piecing together this episode and this script and got it out 3 weeks after we had first heard this story, which is the fastest turnaround time we've ever had for one of our web series episodes. But we just felt it was so important to get out there during trapping season and to start making people aware of this. And this is now spiraled and ballooned into a series of, there's going to be 4 more episodes coming now, all to deal with trapping in one way or another. And we can really see not only how this episode, but how groups like the Fur Bearers and Wolf Matters and Wolf Awareness, which are a couple of groups in BC and Alberta, how this has really started to hit the front burner with some people. And kind of like we saw with the grizzly bear hunt in British Columbia, where all of a sudden the ball started rolling and things really started picking up. We're really starting to see now groups take notice of this, individuals take notice of this, politicians are starting to get letters and emails and phone calls about this. And coupled with some of the other things that are starting to go on, we're starting to see interest increase in education around hound hunting of big cats and bears,
Yep.
and things like wildlife killing contests. So this is all coming together and really starting to build. It's an impetus, I think, for really starting to see the animal rights movement. And I'm not talking the PETA animal rights movement. I'm talking to just normal, everyday, regular people wanting to see our wildlife managed in a different way. And this snaring video that we put out, it was, it's a pretty vivid picture just from the title of it. It's called Choking to Death, Killing Canada's Wolves with Neck Snares. And I think that people are really starting to see what's going on out in our wilderness, that there's been sort of an unregulated Wild West throughout Canada for the last 100 years, and nothing has changed, and it is time for things to change.
And what's fascinating is the fur industry and trappers say that they are highly regulated, which is, in a sense, true in that there are a lot of regulations. However, those regulations do not necessarily come up in the wild. I mean, the regulations have to do with the testing of traps and going and getting licensing and what time of year trapping can be done. But that doesn't mean they can't put up 20 snares around, a meat pile or a bait pile of some kind, which is what you've seen, which is what we've documented as well. So while there's regulations, it's still, as you said, kind of Wild West. And I think one of the very important things, I'd say there's 3 things from your video that I thought were very good to get out there. One was the experience of the people who saw, they saw the carcasses and then they saw this wolf in a snare. And I want to ask you a question about that after. And that is a very visceral reality. As you know, some of our listeners know, I spend a lot of time looking at images as they come in. I'm the filter for our group to look at what's come in, how do we document it, where do we store it, et cetera, investigate it as necessary. And it's a very difficult thing to see. All of these dead animals, all these injured animals. And I think one of the elements that came up as well was I love the animation you folks put together. I said that to you the first time I saw the video of how the snares work with the bait pile and the animals coming in from different angles. And the third thing was you were a vehicle for Dr. Gilbert Prou's, some of his footage of a wolf and a coyote. And in his book, Killing Neck Snares and Strychnine, what's it? Intolerable Cruelty is the title. He documents 2, and this was an active trap site, legally set snares. He inspected them and said they were done properly, and he's an expert in that field. And he hid some field cams around the area, and went back and hid the fact that they were there so the trapper wouldn't know, because he's told me the trappers won't let him record, incidentally. And when he went back, he saw what looked like a wolf and a coyote who had died, as they're supposed to, on the ground. And he said that's what trappers see as well. But then when he went back, the coyote struggled for over 23 hours before it finally died. And that's a stark difference than what trappers say happens. And I think a big part of it is because they set a trap and then they leave. And then at some point they come back. And what's happened in that ensuing time is, it's anybody's guess, realistically. So I think it was very important for that to get out. Is that what your reaction was? I mean, is that sort of when you heard about that documentation, did you have that same kind of like, holy cow, this is not what people say it is?
Well, I did have that reaction in the sense that it was documented on video, but I already knew that was what I've seen a lot of struggle sites on snare trap lines. It's quite obvious when you see a struggle site that something didn't take 3 minutes for an animal to die. When you see chewed off branches everywhere and blood laying around, and it's trampled completely for 10 feet in every direction. And although it's interesting because in one of Gilbert's videos, I found that the wolf one actually even more interesting, because the wolf didn't actually struggle all that much. It didn't thrash around or anything, but it took 2.5 hours to die. It just kept pulling at it kind of and chewing at its leg and kind of trying to reach its own neck. But I'm sure that trapper would have arrived on the scene, and the snow would have hardly been disturbed, and it would have just think, oh, look, it, died peacefully in 30 seconds, just choked to death.
Yeah.
And, it's funny, even a human being, imagine putting a noose around our neck and trying to choke us to death. We don't even, we've got super weak neck muscles, and we're just talking about a rope, not some little thin wire trying to cut through. So I was well aware that that was basically total BS, that these are humane and that they're efficient and that they're effective in killing things quickly and humanely. And then doing research on Gilbert's book, Intolerable Cruelty, you were talking about the regulations, and really part of the trapping industry is highly regulated, and another part of it is not regulated at all. There's no time limits on when they need to check their traps. A lot of these trappers are weekend warriors. They work oil and gas or forestry jobs during the week, and then they head out on the weekends in their big diesel trucks and their snowmobiles and everything, and they go off and run their trap lines. And so animals get trapped in them on, maybe a Monday after the trapper's been there on Saturday and put the bait all around and checked everything. And, maybe on a Monday a wolf comes in, gets trapped, dies by Wednesday. Trapper arrives on the next Saturday and just sees a wolf there and goes, oh, great, got it. And that's it. And I have for years been asking trappers to let me put trail cams on their snare lines. And of course, none of them will let you, because they know that, even though they won't admit it publicly, they know that, they see the struggle sites. They see the animal caught by the leg. They see the cougar caught by accident, the grizzly bear caught by accident. There's all kinds of bycatch. There's pets. They get regularly caught. And it's funny, in these pet stories, and this is going to be one of our episodes coming up here, rarely when pets are caught and the humans are there, do the animals die, because snares don't kill quickly.
Yep.
Usually the humans have time to go and run and get help and find pliers somewhere, or find something to cut the wire and get the dog out, because they just simply do not kill quickly. And it's interesting. This is something that the governments are well aware of, because killing neck snares are not actually included under the, you talk about the fur industry being highly regulated in some aspects, and they have a standards agreement, the agreement under International Humane Trapping Standards that they signed in 1999 with Russia and some European nations and so on. And yet killing neck snares are not included in that agreement. And the video, the episode covers that and says that the reason they're not is governments have gotten around it with a loophole by saying that neck snares are actually homemade killing devices, not commercial killing devices, even though they're sold in Cabela's and just about every outdoor store you can think of that caters to hunters and trappers. And even though all trappers are selling their furs, so there's total commercial aspect to it, and yet they're using this one little loophole and saying, well, someone could make a snare at home, and so they've excluded them from this agreement. So they're not actually, governments are well aware that they're not actually humane and that they're not efficient at killing quickly.
And that's one of the funny things too, is I can, in central Hamilton, one of the, I'd say top, 10, 15 largest cities in the country, highly industrial, sit on my computer and order snares delivered to my door in 2 days.
Of course.
And that, I think when we talk about regulations again, and I don't want to get into a discussion about guns, but if I tried to do that with a gun, there'd be a couple knocks at my door within a few hours. If you want to talk regulated, there are comparisons we can make. But anyway, I find that to be a very compelling point. Also, just as a quick aside, I always say the Agreement on International Humane Trapping Standards is a trade agreement. It was not made to be a scientific consensus. It was not made to be humane. It was made because the EU said, we're not going to allow any furs in that were caught with a leg hole trap. So what they did is they made adjustments to it so that it's got a thin strip of rubber or a millimeter space. And they say, oh, well, now it's going to do less damage. It's a very...
And I mean, it is interesting. It's interesting that you point that out, because that is bang on dead true, because if you go and look at who was actually present during that agreement, it's the trapping industry, it's Trappers Association, it's the fur industry, it's government representatives. There's no representation from animal rights groups or from humane groups or from environmental groups, period, anywhere in there, or any advocates whatsoever on behalf of wildlife. It's just strictly industry that's involved in government. So bureaucrats and industry, and of course, you can see that, why they've excluded the killing neck snare, because that would put a serious damper into the fur industry in Canada. And there are still people clinging to the belief that it's an important industry because it's how our country was founded. And, it's like we're clinging to this thing from the past. We've moved on from hunting whales and shooting eagles and slavery and all sorts of things, yet our society somehow still thinks that killing a wolf in a neck snare so that it can its fur can be put onto the pom-pom of a toque is somehow acceptable.
Yeah, and then the secondary argument is that it's necessary, and there's a great argument being made now by the government and industry that we have to kill wolves to protect the caribou. And I know you've been very active in this campaign as well. But I think it's two new scientists from Saskatchewan have come out saying we did more research, and this is still completely useless. Because
it's one researcher from Saskatchewan, and then the other researcher is from the University of Montana, and he is actually one of the most knowledgeable wildlife biologists there is, Dr. Mark Hebblewhite. He has worked with Parks Canada for several decades in Banff National Park and in studies all over Alberta and British Columbia. And when he comes out and says that killing wolves does absolutely nothing for recovering caribou, he's pretty much at the top of the game in terms of wildlife biology. And then to have Dr. Ryan Brooks say the same thing from Saskatchewan, really that's an article CBC picked up, and they had to pick up. These are, experts at the top of their field saying that there's absolutely no research to back this up. And, just this whole idea that wildlife needs to be managed in this way, that predators need to be managed in this way. Maybe if you really stretch things, there's an argument to be made where there's human livestock conflict, that there are times when you need to step in and manage in there, and certainly there will be. But when you just step off into the wilderness, there is absolutely zero reason that predators like wolves need to be managed out in the wilderness. They're an apex predator. They regulate their own population sizes. So this whole notion that wildlife needs to be managed in this way is really a step back to the 1950s and to this idea that we've got to have our hands on things. There's all sorts of research showing that we don't need to be in there constantly over-managing stuff. That there's all kinds of research indicating that wolves are not the primary factor in deer declines or elk declines or caribou declines, just as the same sort of research exists for cougars and for other large predators.
Yep, and that's when we talk about that, it's, I think, again, the caribou herds out west are the perfect example of the science is very clear. It is change to the habitat caused by people. And the only thing that will help them is fixing that habitat. That's the only thing that will help. But I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know you are between shoots and projects and time with your new family. Congratulations, by the way. I don't think I've talked to you since then.
Thanks.
That must be exciting. A whole new world.
It is, yes. Yes. A new environmental advocate to join the world.
I'll send a little Defender Radio shirt over. So what can people do? I mean, you see these videos. They are extremely well put together. You do a wonderful job hosting. Your team is outstanding. I'm very pleased to have been sort of peripherally involved in some of it. What can people do when they see this and they want change to happen?
There's a couple of things that are really do. Number one, on our website, exposedgem.com, JEM.com, we've got a take action page, and it points to all sorts of different things you can do, varying from tweeting to posting on Facebook to emailing directly. But probably the biggest thing that's on there, and the one that obviously you guys are tied in with, is that you put together a call to action a form letter, basically, that people can go in and put in their postal code and put in their name and sign this, so to speak, and it automatically gets sent to their MLA based on their postal code, and calls for a ban on killing neck snares. And we've had a tremendous response from that. You were telling me just last week we're up over 2,500.
It's actually over
already.
It's over 3,500 now.
Amazing. So, I mean, that's 1,000 just in the last week and a bit. So really having a huge impact. And this is politicians across the country that are going to be seeing this for the first time. And that's really the start of it, is we have to just start getting this in front of the politicians and start getting in front of the wildlife management, government, and that's where change starts to happen. So I think it's really powerful for people to be able to know that, and to be able to see that, it's really simple. Just go in, put your postal code in, put your name in, sign it, and it's all online, and you hit send, and your letter is sent off asking for a ban and pointing politicians to what's going on right now. And I think it's so easy, and that's why we're seeing such a huge response to it. So
and we also need people to share. We also need people to share that video.
Absolutely, yeah. The more we can get that video out there, it's we're up almost 43,000 views on Facebook now, and we've had we're up at 8,000 now on YouTube. And YouTube, to have 8,000 after just 2 weeks is phenomenal. So at that growth rate, it indicates that we'll be up around 50,000 by the end of the year, because it just continues to grow and grow and grow, which is just fantastic. So, I think by the end of this, once we get these additional episodes coming out, we're probably going to be looking at somewhere up close to 500,000 views between all of these different videos, which is going to be just phenomenal. The amount of education that we're getting out there, and the amount of outreach, amount of awareness, and then in particular, the amount of awareness that we're going to start to raise within the political community.
You can check out the latest episode of Exposed, as well as some beautiful past episodes at exposedwithjohnemarriott.com, or find Exposed on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by searching Exposed with John E. Marriott. I want to thank all of you for listening this week, and John for taking time out of a very busy schedule to chat with me. I'm working on getting a new lineup of interviews ready, so expect more Defender Radio soon. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bears, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.